A good home is the greatest need of life. There's no place like it. A good place to be born. A good place to spend a childhood. To grow up in happiness and peace. A good place to marry and settle down. A place where you feel you belong. People are proud of their homes. They look after them, paint them up, decorate them, give them flame-colored doors, their own names, and fancy number plates. Fill a window box with flowers. In 1944, the Commonwealth Government Housing Commission stated, "We consider that a dwelling of good standard is not only the need, but the right of every citizen." A good home, the right and need of every citizen. That was in 1944. But today, despite extensive state government and private building, a lot of citizens find that rights have not been granted, their housing needs unfulfilled. Australia today faces a critical housing problem, a dire shortage of adequate homes. In New South Wales alone, 80,000 families live in substandard houses. In Sydney, 35,000 dwellings have been officially condemned, unfit for human habitation. But people live in them. They have to live in them. The housing shortage means that slums and old, inadequate buildings cannot be demolished. People have to live somewhere. For many, home is a room or two in a tenement. Congested suburbs of smoke and noise. Suburbs where the children play in cramped backyards. No room to run or jump. Play on rubbish dumps. Hemmed in by the shadows of fences. Not much of a home to feel proud of. Overcrowding. Too many people jammed in too little space. One room with a balcony to raise a growing family. One room with a bed on the balcony, with the stove and the sink and the washing. And the wireless next door when the baby should be sleeping. And the baby next door when you're trying to hear the wireless. How can we measure the destructive physical and psychological effect on families, parents and children, of intolerable living conditions? How much sickness and discomfort compressed in a square mile of tenements? How much hopeless frustration to a dingy room? How much monotonous misery to a square mile of slums? A family of 2 adults and 3 children live in this one-roomed flat. No less than 20 people in 6 rooms here. 7 adults in a 4-roomed house with only 2 sleeping rooms. 4 adults and 9 children live here in 2 rooms. Sydney local government health authorities report these typical examples of overcrowding. And things aren't getting any better. Thousands more home seekers are arriving from overseas. But today, immigration means more camps, more congestion. Not a very happy way to start life in a new country. Australia is a land sky-wide in space and sunshine. Just the place for a home, the kind of home everyone should have. Our architects design ideal homes by the thousand. Good homes, modern homes, sun-trapped, cantilever, bungalow, Georgian, colonial, Tudor, to suit anyone's tastes and needs. Real homes for families to live and grow in decent surroundings, in the manner of our 20th century civilization. Everything that's needed for a home is manufactured here. In normal times, 30% of Australia's working population has a hand in making homes. Dozens of industries bake bricks and tiles, cut timber, manufacture fittings, furniture, carpets, television sets, refrigerators, gardening tools, and 10,000 more odds and ends. Big things and little things for outsides and insides of homes. There's no shortage of materials. No shortage of material, but there is a falling demand, forcing some manufacturers to curtail production, in some cases, to close down altogether. Neither is there a shortage of skilled building tradesmen. The Building Workers' Industrial Union has 45,000 members, but fewer are being employed on housing and more on commercial buildings. And there is growing unemployment in the industry. The material and manpower to build homes is available. There's a desperate need for homes, but the fact is fewer and fewer are being built. Here are the actual figures. In 1955, just over 82,000 dwellings were built throughout Australia. In 1956, only 78,000 odd. The latest figures to hand for the year ending June 1957 are 68,050, which is 10,000 less than the previous year. And the reason? Ask any prospective home builders. Finance. Take this couple, for example. They've saved up £700 and bought a block of land. The house they want to build would look like this when completed. Timber and fibro, 5 rooms, modest enough, 4 walls and a roof. But 1 million Australians would give their eye teeth to own it. Here's what it would mean in terms of cash. Like most wage earners, our home builder has to borrow the money he needs to build his house. He needs £3,100. And if he's lucky enough to get it, the most favorable interest rate available is 5.5%. Here's where the money goes. Labor costs for building tradesmen, £720. Materials, overhead and profit, £2,380. That totals £3,100, the actual cost of the house. Now the interest has to be paid. The interest, with the loan repaid over 30 years, is £3,298, bringing the total cost of the house to $6,398. There's no way round it. Whichever way you look at it, it's £4.2 a week for 30 years. That's without rates, taxes and maintenance. £4.2 a week. In average figures, that's 9 and threepence for labour, £1.10 and 6 for material, overhead and profit. Interest, £2.2 and 3 a week. That's where the money goes. The financial problem confronts many others, too, who already have houses of a kind, temporary dwellings. 24,000 people live in garages and temporary dwellings in Sydney alone. Many who have bought land and built the nucleus of a home now find themselves unable to borrow the money to complete their homes. Permanently temporary. For many others, building a home is out of the question. But they urgently need decent rental dwellings at a rent within their means. Virtually none are available. No wonder people have to put up with this. Lack of finance, no loans for home building, interest rates too high, fewer rental dwellings being built. That's the story behind the housing problem. The Australian Council of Trade Unions is the national centre of the Australian trade union movement. It represents the voice of more than 1 million workers. Concerned with the housing crisis, the Council of Trade Unions convened a national conference of building trades and kindred unions and elected a committee charged with the responsibility of determining a housing policy and program. A policy and program subsequently endorsed by the entire trade union movement. Here, the committee members, representing building and allied unions in all states, plan further developments in the campaign for adequate housing for the people. The trade union movement believes a solution can be found. They know that the manpower and material is available and that the finance can be found. Large reserve assets are held by the Commonwealth Bank, which could be used for home building. £62 million consisting of surplus defence monies are held by the Commonwealth Government. The trading banks have £350 million at credit in a special fund at the Commonwealth Bank. A total of £412 million, money virtually in deep freeze. This amount could substantially help to solve Australia's housing problem. Mr. Albert Monk of the Australian Council of Trade Unions summarises the objectives of the Council's programme to deal with the housing crisis.
The trade union movement strongly urges the Commonwealth Government to implement the following measures. Provide sufficient finance to allow state housing commissions and cooperative societies to operate to the full extent of their capacities. Release £100 million from the reserve funds of private banks. Float £100 million housing loan. Use the unexpended portion of the defence vote to finance home construction and essential works and services. Provide for the reintroduction in all states of the rental rebate system and special consideration for pensioners and low-income groups. Fix a home building interest rate of not more than 3% and subsidise home finance authorities to enable all home loans to be made at that rate. The object of this program is to overcome the national building chaos, imposing hardship on trade unionists and the people generally. To rally public interest and support for these objectives, people's housing conferences have been held in a number of states, where representatives of every section of the community have shown their support for the trade union program, which is in the best interest of the Australian people.
The programme and policy formulated by the Building Trades Committee were taken to the men on the job. At meetings like this in every state, the members of all the building trades unions declared their full support for the programme. They organised and planned for it, threw their weight behind it. At the first of the housing conferences, which was held in Sydney, Over 400 organizations and workplaces were represented by nearly 1,000 delegates. Trade unions, labor councils, progress and parents and citizens associations, welfare and religious organizations, housing settlements and camps, women's organizations, local councils, cooperative societies, pensioners, returned servicemen, builders and manufacturers were all represented here. The pooled experience and knowledge of all these delegates made it abundantly clear that the nation's housing problem can be solved through the release of finance by the Commonwealth government. The release of finance by the Commonwealth government would mean that state housing projects could be vastly expanded, that adequate housing would soon become available to pensioners and other low-income groups. The trade union's program recommendation for reduced interest rates would mean that those desiring to build a home of their own could secure finance at a rate they could afford. This graph shows the difference in cash between 5.5% and 3% interest. On our £3,100 house, 5.5% interest means a total repayment of £6,398 over 30 years. At 3% interest, the total repayment on the same house is £4,899, which is £1,499 less. The release of government finance would mean that in a few years, housing problems in Australia could be largely overcome. The housing crisis concerns everyone. All those lacking decent homes, those struggling to pay high interest, the ones who secure their livelihood from building and allied trades, tomorrow's citizens and homemakers, all those who agree that a good home is the right and need of every citizen, and surely that is every one of us. Through united action and firm demand by every one of us, this will be achieved.